So thank you for coming today. We're here to talk about the expansion of aviation biofuels in the UK and how that contributes to greenwashing and injustice and how we can push back against it. And we're very lucky to have some great speakers here with us today. Gary from Biofuelwatch and Mariana from Rainforest Rescue. As we go through, do put any questions that you have for any of the speakers in the chat, or if you can prefer, you can keep them till the end and then ask them yourself. If you have any problems with tech, you can't hear, you can't use the chat function, do get in touch with Sally. She's here to help us all with that. And yeah, I think without further ado, I'm going to attempt now to do a little poll for everyone to see where we're coming from with our understanding of the issue. So hopefully you can see the poll now and do feel free to answer it.
Well, very high level of participation from everyone. What a great audience. Thanks.
So you can see that there's a lot of nuance and complexity around the issue. There's a lot of technical concepts and different feedstocks and different understandings of what's going on, and potentially some misconceptions as well as more accurate understandings. So thank you all for taking part, and hopefully we will all be much more knowledgeable by the end. So from here, I'm just going to head into the first presentation, and we're just going to talk about a brief overview of the issue as it stands. So the first thing to understand is where aviation is at the moment and what it means for the climate and for us. So aviation is one of the most carbon intense human activities there are. It's responsible for 2.5% of global emissions and 4% of the warming that's already taken place. And it's one of the fastest growing transport sectors in the world. In the first 2 decades of the century, it expanded faster than rail, shipping, and driving. And in the UK, it's a particular issue because our aviation footprint is growing. So it's 7% at the moment, but in 2030, it's likely to be 11% and up to 16% by 2035. And it's not just that burning fossil fuels is bad for the environment, although obviously we all do understand that. But when you combust fossil fuels in the atmosphere, they will have a more potent greenhouse effect than if you burnt them at ground level, which is why aviation itself is so particularly carbon intensive. And contrails also contribute and can have a greater warming effect than CO2. And in the UK, to and from the UK in 2024 alone, there were 1.98 million flights. So it's a very big emissions sector. So then obviously airlines, airports, they come under pressure from consumers and from the government to reduce their footprint. And their solution to this has been sustainable aviation fuel, as they call it. which can come from a variety of feedstocks, mostly organic, in which case it's a biofuel. Animal fats used cooking oil, and occasionally waste are used, but usually it's vegetable oil. And this will come from oil palm, soybean, sometimes rapeseed. And the industry has been promising certain more advanced fuels like solid biomass turned into aviation fuel, but there hasn't really been a scalable example of that on the market as yet. And we've been promised a lot of further advanced fuels for many years, and they've not really materialized at scale. So at the moment, aviation biofuels pretty much all vegetable oil. And it's not scaling very quickly. So last year, 0.3% of all the aviation fuel used was so-called sustainable aviation fuel. So this is an issue because the government is planning airport expansions at the moment. So this is in an effort to boost the economy and create more international connectivity. And these are happening all over. Obviously, Heathrow got a lot of attention when it was announced, but there's also planned expansions in Bristol and Leeds and elsewhere. And in some places, local government have ruled against airports on grounds of noise pollution or air pollution, and central government has overruled that. This is a big problem because we've had information from the High Court and from the Climate Change Committee talking about airport expansion being a serious obstacle to us meeting our targets under Paris for 1.5 degrees. And so the government is still pursuing SAF as a way to kind of alleviate these concerns and convince the public that they're dealing with aviation emissions without being willing to have more honest conversations about inconvenience and about changing people's habits. And so SAF is seen as a business as usual solution. And there are up to 20 planned airport expansions in the UK. So it's a very seriously growing sector. But aviation biofuels are not a genuine climate solution, and this is for a whole host of reasons. Most of their feedstocks are grown in the global south, places like South America, Southeast Asia, in these enormous monocultures on land that was previously a rainforest or a peat bog and that was sequestering carbon. And the loss of these landscapes creates huge emissions of CO2. It endangers the biodiversity that lives there, and it also has serious impacts on human communities who are forced from their land or exposed to pesticides and fertilizers that are toxic, or they lose their access to food and subsistence. And so this is a really serious human rights issue as well. There's also the fact that biofuels, especially vegetable oil, will just keep emitting CO2 when burned. They're not carbon neutral in that respect, and they've been treated as saving CO2 because of the carbon that they sequester when they grow. But as we can see, the land use change doesn't actually sequester carbon, it releases carbon. They're also not hugely scalable, at least within aviation. There have been repeated targets over the years for 10%, etc. And as you see, it's still less than 1%, and usually in a blend with traditional kerosene rather than fueling engines themselves. And by 2040, it's imagined that 0.8% of the expanding emissions of aviation will have been prevented by biofuels, which is really a drop in the ocean. And that's the amount of land every year that is deforested for oilseed crops like palm and soy. There's also problems in the refinery aspect of the supply chain. I'm not going to go into this too much because we're going to hear in more detail about it later. But the UK government has promised 5 SAF biorefineries for the past 3 years. None of them have materialized, and they have come online in other places with not particularly positive results. They're often unsafe facilities due to lagging regulation and workforce expertise, which creates unnecessary hazards because everything is set up to process petroleum in facilities that convert to biofuels. And this means that there's often fires and injuries and pollution in local communities. However, it's clearly, as you can see from the value of the global market, a big source of money for corporations and for companies. And so we've got pretty big vested interests in the biofuel industry. And an example site is the Grangemouth oil refinery in Scotland, which was closed in April with large numbers of redundancies. And there isn't a firm plan for the future of the site, but several proposed developments involve aviation biofuels of varying degrees of viability based on their feedstock. And many members of both governments and MPs and MSPs think that this is a good solution for the site that will provide jobs, but we're not convinced. We think that it will create emissions, injustice on a global and a local scale, dangerous working conditions, local pollution, and further employment instability because it's a very volatile sector, vulnerable to supply chain issues. And we know as well that several biorefineries in the UK have gone bust in the last few months. And so it's not a guaranteed long-term employment for a worker who's leaving the petroleum industry either. And there's been another refinery closed in Lincolnshire recently, which is potentially also at risk of being converted to biofuels. But it will be much better for our long-term emissions reduction and employment to create sites to manufacture and recycle renewables technologies instead. But there is a lot we can do about the expansion of aviation biofuels, which is good. We don't have to just let business as usual continue. So we can keep learning and we can share what we learn with others. We can use the organizations that we work for or are volunteers for to campaign against the uptake of biofuels. And we can pass motions condemning SAF if we're in a trade union or a local government or a student organization. And we can engage with MPs, MSPs, etc. We can write in, and we have an action that we will share with you later to write to your MP about this. But you can also meet with them personally or green card them in Parliament or go to a protest. You can also give up flying either for a year or permanently, as that's the best way to avoid aviation emissions at the moment. And you can build relationships of solidarity with people across the world who are dealing with the negative impacts of the biofuels industry. We can also divest our money, both personally and by pushing our banks or our pensions or any institutions that we're involved with to divest from biofuels and from aviation. We can just raise public awareness because a lot of people don't know about biofuels and that this is happening. And we can oppose biofuel infrastructure developments in our local area. So I have, yeah, and 16,000 plus tons of CO2 have been saved by people going flight free since 2019. So that does make a difference. I have a little quiz here. Do feel free to let us know what you would like to do. Great to see so much participation. Thank you all for being so engaged. Okay, great. Let's have a look at what everyone has said. So these are some great answers. Write to MPs, let friends know, no longer flying, opposing manufacture where you are, educate policymakers, different ways of traveling, journalism, opposing airport expansion, meeting your MP. This is all really great.
Pax, sorry, we've just had somebody mention that the question didn't come up on the screen for them. Is it possible for you to read out any more of the answers that people put in?
Yeah, or how am I doing for time though, Sally?
I think you're okay.
Okay, yeah, I will hopefully be able to share those around.
Should have gone off. They're still there down the side, but
Are people wanting me just to read out some more of the answers?
That would be fab. And maybe then if we can send them in the follow-up email.
Sure. So some more people are talking about meeting their MPs, and people are talking about raising local awareness, not flying, trade union opposition to biofuels, talking to regional mayors, protests, supporting NGOs, engaging with legislators and also frequent flyers. So this is all really great, and thank you everyone so much. So that's all from me. We'll be moving on now to my colleague, Gary. And Gary is a co-director with Biofuelwatch with more than 5 years of experience with the organization on a broad array of campaigns, with a special focus on California state climate policy. His advocacy experience spans the Western USA and Canada, as well as much of Latin America, especially Mexico and Chile. He currently lives with his family in the San Francisco Bay. Gary, over to you.
right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for your patience. I think there's been a little bit of technical slowness, but we're really glad to have everyone here. And I also want to recognize that there are a lot of very experienced and very talented people in the audience. Several people here are people who've helped me understand these issues. My name is Gary Hughes. I work with Biofuelwatch based in California. And my goal here is to spend just 10 minutes going through some slides, really focused on the refinery impacts around the manufacture of liquid biofuels, and really trying to speak then a bit about the dynamics, as it were, with the refiners and sustainable aviation fuels. Now, California has become a center of liquid biofuel refining globally. And here in the San Francisco Bay Area in particular, kind of assuming that people have some understanding of the geography where California is placed on the Pacific shore of Western North America in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's 5 refineries here, and 2 of these 5 have converted over the last 5 years to making liquid biofuels. This is really evidence of the fact that much climate so-called innovation isn't really innovation at all. They're just going back to using the same old dirty technologies, and in this instance using different feedstocks to make a liquid fuel product that for the most part isn't really that distinguishable from the products that are being made from petroleum. And in particular, in California, these refineries use an old technology called hydrocrackers, and then to make the liquid biofuel requires phenomenal amounts of hydrogen. So we do put a fair amount of emphasis on the land use impacts, but it has to be understood that making liquid biofuels generates more refinery emissions than even just making a liquid fuel from petroleum. So we have been trying to raise the alarm, as it were, about the issues with calling these fuels low carbon. They're actually high emissions. And then they can also, their manufacturer can have phenomenal impacts on the local environment. And this aerial shot of the Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo actually shows how the bay itself, the San Francisco Bay, is put at risk from the manufacture of the fuels. One thing to point out is that biofuels, because of the bio part of it, are oftentimes advertised as being benign products. But this fire that happened in the tank farm that's adjacent to the Phillips 66 refinery in Rodeo was actually ethanol. We're not getting into ethanol right here. Ethanol is a liquid fuel that's made from corn. It's used extensively in California as an additive with gasoline. There's been some discussion about being able to refine corn into making a sustainable aviation fuel itself. But what I really wanted to point out here is that this fire burned, and it didn't matter that it was ethanol. It was as dangerous as gasoline or diesel, or it's just another liquid fuel. And really trying to counter this narrative that for some reason, because a biofuel is bio, that it's not dangerous to the environment. So the drive for liquid biofuels in California has been a result of climate policy, and in particular in California, there's the low carbon fuel standard, which provides the producer of these liquid biofuels with certain credits to use in the incentive mechanism. These credits can be very lucrative. And so the low carbon fuel standard includes pathways for making what they call alternative jet fuel, which is just another moniker for the sustainable aviation fuel. But the other thing that the low carbon fuel standard offers are credits for making a product that's called renewable diesel. And renewable diesel is distinct from what we know as biodiesel because it does not have to be mixed with any other fuel. It doesn't have to be mixed with a petroleum-based diesel. It's a drop-in liquid biofuel. It can be used straight in the diesel engine. without any modifications to the engine. So the promise of these very lucrative credits has driven the conversion of refineries to making liquid biofuels. The refineries have really tremendous air pollution impacts. There may be some elements like sulfur dioxide that are reduced because they're no longer using a petroleum feedstock, but the truth is that there are lots of other volatile organic compounds and other air pollution risks that are only slightly reduced by making liquid biofuels, and then issues like particulate matter remain very, very acute. So Biofuelwatch participated, for instance, in this report that was done by the Environmental Integrity Project that looked at the harms arising from biofuel production. So just a real quick flyby, though, to recognize we're going to get further into the land use issues. In California, it's primarily soy that's being used as a feedstock for making liquid biofuels, whether it be the sustainable aviation fuel or what we've seen predominantly, almost exclusively actually, is the renewable diesel. And I would like to get into a little bit about those impacts at the end of this discussion, the economic impacts of relying on renewable diesel in California and how that affects the sustainable aviation fuel market. But while I continue to focus on the refinery impacts, I wanted to point out in this slide, which comes from the local air district that regulates the refineries in the area, that you can see that the Marathon refinery, which is one of the refineries that has converted to making biofuels, with a $1 billion investment from the Finnish company Neste. So it's actually Marathon and Neste that are running the biofuel refinery in Martinez, and Neste is also the operator of a very significant refinery in Singapore and Rotterdam. So we can see here the Marathon is the green bar, that as the refinery was converted to biofuels, that there was a spike in the number of flaring incidences. And to remember that flaring is one of the causes of really severe air pollution risks, and then also tremendous public and worker safety. And in November 2023, at the Marathon refinery, there was a major accident as they ramped up the production of liquid biofuels, in particular of renewable diesel. And it resulted in a very tragic injury to one of the workers, who spent more than 9 months in the burn center at the hospital at the University of California, Davis. And then the United States Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board did look very closely at this accident, and they did a report that was released just earlier this year, where they really highlighted a number of issues that led to this accident, amongst which, very importantly to recognize, is the failings in corporate oversight. So I think it's very important that we all remember just exactly how dangerous it is to make these fuels. And again, just because you're converting a refinery to making biofuels doesn't actually make it like a safer place. It makes it a more dangerous place, because the incredible amounts of hydrogen that are required and the very high temperatures that are maintained to refine a feedstock like soy into a liquid biofuel. Well, what I wanted to really point out here for sustainable aviation fuels is to recognize that for the refiners themselves, because making sustainable aviation fuel takes even more feedstock and even more hydrogen, it is even more costly than making the renewable diesel. And what we see in California right now is an absolute explosion in the manufacture and use of renewable diesel. Phillips 66 itself is marketing throughout the state the renewable diesel. And it's really interesting. If you can look at the small print there, they call it biomass based. It's a little bit misleading because it's certainly not woody biomass, but that, they don't say that it's made from soy. They don't say that it's made from food. But renewable diesel is also being imported into California at very, very high rates. For instance, the Neste refinery in Singapore is importing millions of gallons of renewable diesel to California every year. Biofuel Watch has been working on these issues really hard. As I said, there's a number of people in the audience who have helped us understand these issues. We've collaborated with people, but we're really focused on the dangers of aviation fuels and what it would mean to scale up a bio-based type aviation fuel. But we're really attentive to how the demand, for instance, in the shipping sector, as well as renewable diesel is really the motor of driving the expansion of the manufacture and use of all these fuels. So the big question really is this transition or a trap to be converting refineries to biofuels here in California? Clearly, our position is that this is a trap. It's a climate dead end. It's also a narrative battle because we are really swimming upstream against the kind of popular notion that these biofuels are a climate solution. And of course, decision makers have embraced them fully because it's a really easy thing to suggest that all you have to do is start making fuel from commodities like soy and our climate situation is resolved. So that's my little presentation on the issues around refineries that we're trying to elevate. And I look forward to answering any questions later. Right now, I will pass it back to Pax.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was brilliant. Thank you. So we're now going to pass on to our next wonderful speaker, who is Mariana Kluter from Rainforest Rescue.
Hello, Pax.
Hi.
I'm very happy you invited me and to see so many faces here. I will talk about Indonesia. As Rainforest Rescue, we are working mainly with the communities on the ground and also with non-governmental organizations. I hope you can understand my English. And I will try to share my screen. Is this okay? Can you see it? Okay. We are working on several countries related to rainforest and rainforest destruction. And one of the regions is Southeast Asia. And me, myself, I'm working mainly on Indonesia. This is what we happened to see is what you see on the picture, massive deforestation, land grabbing, and impact on the local people. So I was very, glad or not glad, I don't know. When I tried to prepare for this session, I found that last week, the first commercial flight in Indonesia with sustainable aviation fuel produced by the national oil company Pertamina has been conducted, flight from Jakarta to Bali. And this was the first fuel produced by Indonesia itself. So Indonesia was, or still is very proud to announce this success. Wie geht es weiter? Don't know. Wait a moment, I try to understand. Okay. Okay. Indonesia is the largest producer of palm oil in the world and even produce more than Malaysia. I want to have a quick look back on the history of the development of palm oil plantations, because what we now experience is that there is a huge amount of palm oil produced. when in 1984, the year I mentioned here, Indonesia had about 500,000 hectares of palm oil plantations. This was left over from the colonial times, from old Dutch companies. But then something happened: political, economical, and technological changes, the development of the food industries, and so on. There has been an expansion until the year 2006 to 5.6 million hectares of palm oil plantations in Indonesia. And then at a very important landmark or time, it was the year 2006, when industrial states developed their renewable energies and climate policies, and Indonesia answered with plans to develop 26 million hectares until the year 2025, or until today. And this is what they nearly did. We counted from 2006 to 2025, 22 million hectares of palm oil plantations, and even more. We cannot count all of them because not all of them are legal or not productive, and so on. And now Indonesia has become the world's largest producer of palm oil, and also the third largest in biofuel production from palm oil. They produce now more than 10 million liters per year. We have a look at the map. Indonesia is located between Australia, which you see at the bottom of the map, and Southeast Asian countries on the continent, like Thailand, you see. And here in green are the palm oil plantations according to their productivity, and the yellow spots are the palm oil mills, which produce from the fruit the crude palm oil. And you see that most of Sumatra is really covered in palm oil plantations, and it is the center of the palm oil industry, of refineries, of oleochemicals, and what else. And the last 10 years, we see the expansion into Borneo, which is here called Kalimantan in Indonesian, and the other islands are still not so important, but will be more important in the future. So what palm oil did is destroyed rainforest culture identities already in most of Sumatra and Borneo. In that year, what I said, that was a reaction of the renewable and climate policies of industrial states. And the EU, where I live in Berlin, in Germany, has an important role, played an important role. The Renewable Energy Directive, the first one, opened the market for palm oil used in fuel. And this was the trigger of the massive expansion of palm oil plantation, with all the impacts like the land use change, the deforestation, and the land conflicts. After nearly 10 years, or maybe more, of lobbying, of campaigning, of supporting local communities, now the Renewable Energy Directive number 2 is now excluding palm oil and other oils like soy oil as acknowledgeable as renewable energy. But biofuel from waste and advanced biofuels, as Gary mentioned before, are still supported, subsidized, and acknowledged. What we see after this RED II is that the import of palm oil dropped, especially in Europe, and the numbers I know from Germany, it dropped by 1/3 already in Germany. So the fresh palm oil, the crude palm oil, which is mixed into biofuel, is less consumed in the European Union. But what we see also, that the import of used cooking oil from Indonesia has increased significantly. Despite the development that the industrial states do not longer support palm oil as biofuel or biodiesel, the Indonesian government is very much supporting the extension of a lot more hectares for the production of palm oil. For example, the forest minister, Raja Juli Antoni, even wants to clear more than 20 million hectares for food and energy programs, including palm oil, but also for sugarcane and other food crops. And President Prabowo Subianto even said things like oil palms are trees, expansion of plantations does not lead to deforestation, don't be afraid of deforestation, and so on. If we calculate together with Forest Watch Indonesia what the mandate of the use of biofuels means in transportation, but also the use of palm oil in industries and in power plants, then we come to the conclusion that this will need another 4.56 million hectares of rainforest or land. This year, Indonesia presented the biofuel roadmap for the next 10 years. So the country itself started the development of biofuels already in 2006 and had their first biofuel mandate roadmap in 2008 and supported the production of biofuels with subsidies and incentives. Not much success, but only in 1 year they succeeded to fulfill the mandatory target of 20%. This was the year 2019. The new biofuel roadmap means, first of all, sets the mandatory blending rates higher from 30%, over 40%, even to 50%. They also have programs for bioethanol from sugarcane. There's a huge project in south of Papua, which is of much concern. And also the sustainable aviation fuel is included as a program in the Indonesian new biofuel roadmap. And the drop-in biofuels, which are the second or third generation of biofuels from plants or from biomass. This year, we see about 10 million liters of biofuel produced in Indonesia, which makes it a big global producer. And because of this biofuel roadmap incentives and programs, in the next 1.5 years, the production will increase to 16 million liters. We have here a graph with the blend targets. In light green, you see the biofuel from palm oil for diesel. In dark green, the targets for ethanol from sugarcane. And the smaller one, the small light blue thing is the biofuel blend for the aviation industry. This blending alone will increase the deforestation, and this is the blending for Indonesia alone. This is not for other countries like Europe or China or India or Malaysia. This will increase the deforestation for more than 2 billion hectares. The impacts also mentioned by Gary and Pax before are huge. There will be more land grabbing there will be more land right conflicts. Alone related to palm oil, we have more than 1,000 land right conflicts. And the violation of human rights, indigenous rights, and also labor rights will increase, biodiversity loss. So the program, the biofuel and also the biomass program of Indonesia, which is one part of the global picture, will lead to a huge, to huge impacts. When we see that, we heard before that less crude palm oil is exported from Indonesia than still in 2019-20 or so, but the amount of used cooking oil exported from Indonesia increased a lot. There are different sources. Some sources already say it exceeds the export of crude palm oil. And in this graph, we see the export into Malaysia. Malaysia is one of the shipping hubs. And we see a huge part exported to the United States of America, and then Europe, and third place. So this is one of our main concerns also, not only the deforestation, the human rights violations, and the destruction of so many cultures, is that there is a huge fraud going on with the used cooking oil from Indonesia. And here in this graph is the expectation, the demand for this used CAO in different countries. In blue, North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific, South America, Middle East, and Africa. They will increase a lot, in January, even the government of Indonesia forbade the export of used cooking oil, palm oil in this case. And what will happen, I don't know what we will see. So this was a small insight into the situation in Indonesia. I hope I did not speak too long. I cannot hear you.
That was great, Mariana. Thank you so much. So we're going to just move to questions now. So do put any last ones in the chat. We probably won't get to everyone, but if we don't get to your question, do get in touch with us after the webinar is over and we'll see if we can answer them. So if we start with a question from Rob Palgrave about what about the fuel used by propeller planes and helicopters? Some commentators I follow on clean energy believe battery-powered planes are a real prospect, even for international flights of a few hundred miles. So, as far as I understand, battery energy at the moment is quite confined to short haul and small craft. So that's still an emerging technology. And I'd imagine that biofuels are being touted for all of them. But our big issue at the moment is just the sustainability issues of biofuels and the supply problems. So then we've got a question for Gary from Roger Hayden, asking, do we need to challenge the term renewable?
Yeah, I could actually address that really quickly. I mean, certainly in narrative terms, we want to challenge the the use of the term sustainable, or for sustainable aviation fuel or renewable diesel. There's nothing renewable about renewable diesel. Technically, to recognize that in the United States, there is a renewable fuel standard, and there are specifics about the required emissions reductions for a diesel fuel made from a commodity like soy to actually be characterized as renewable. And with Earth Justice, we've had an opportunity to crunch some numbers, and it's really clear if you do a full life cycle analysis of these fuels, including a really honest accounting for the land use impacts, that they really don't meet those thresholds for emissions reductions that qualify them as renewable. So there's both a narrative reason for challenging these fuels being called renewable or sustainable, but there's actually also existing technical legal reasons. Now, whether or not we can get, agencies and decision makers to do a full carbon accounting is a political question that we're wrestling with. But I would, just 100% believe that we do need to challenge the characterization of these fuels as renewable or sustainable or low carbon or whatever it might be.
Great, thank you so much. And we've got a question for Mariana. Jean-Marie would like to know, is Malaysia's Borneo also involved in palm oil at the same scale as Indonesia?
Not on the same scale. In Sarawak and Sabah, there are a lot of palm oil plantations, but Indonesia, of course, has a larger landmass and, of course, bigger islands. So Indonesia is number one. But in Sarawak and Sabah are many, many palm oil plantations. And the same land grabbing is going on.
So I think we have time for a couple more questions. So I'll probably just have a look on here, and then perhaps if anyone has a burning question they'd like to ask in person, they could raise their hand. So this is an interesting question from Mike Jeffs. There's clearly huge harm associated with scaling up aviation biofuels, but are we in danger of avoiding the real conversation, which is about reducing demand for flying? Shouldn't genuine climate policy start with saying we need fewer flights? I would absolutely agree. Biofuelwatch is a member of the Stay Grounded network, whose position is that demand management is crucial for decarbonizing aviation. And you can learn a lot about the issue by checking out resources from Stay Grounded. And there's also the Safe Landing Group, who I believe we have some representatives of in the webinar today, working with aviation workers around these issues. The government is obviously much more interested in SAF, and so is business, because it maintains the social license for flying. And that's a big part of why aviation biofuels are being expanded. So anything you can do to challenge the notion that unabated aviation can continue is a positive step.